We're back at it again, finishing our look at the Resident Evil PlayStation 1 trilogy, this time with Resident Evil 3 as we continue Road to the Rocket Launcher. The show all about analyzing the design of Capcom's legendary horror series by charting its evolution from beginning to now. The history segment of this video is kind of more relevant than usual in regards to how one assesses the choices made in Resident Evil 3's design, because unlike 1 and 2, 3 was originally not intended to be a mainline Resi title. Instead, a spin-off currently being directed by Kazuhito Aoyama, who was on the development team during previous titles, was promoted to the status of main entry. The reason for this is a bit nebulous. From the sources I found, it seems like Capcom simply wanted a new numbered title released while they waited for the upcoming Hideki Kamiya directed PlayStation 2 Resident Evil game they thought they were going to get, while also keeping the first 3 main entries on PS1 for consistency's sake or whatever, rather than give the honors to the Dreamcast or Nintendo 64 games in development. But the why doesn't really matter. What's relevant for today is that Resident Evil: The Side Story became Resident Evil 3 Nemesis.
Resident Evil 3.
Now you may be wondering, am I going to cut Resi 3 some slack for any shortcomings since it was originally intended to be some kind of side title and not a main eventer? The answer is no, because for the most part I don't really have to. I'm happy to report that despite being a little out of step with the first 2 titles in some areas, Resi 3 is absolutely a worthy sequel to the games that came before and a fantastic conclusion to the PS1 trilogy. Starting just before the events of Resi 2, Jill Valentine, STARS member and survivor of the events of the first Resident Evil, has to escape the now zombie-infested Raccoon City. She soon comes across a mercenary team also stuck in the chaos and must work together with a young soldier named Carlos to get out alive. That's it, it's one long last escape. Resi 3 adds quite a few additions to its gameplay, and I think the decision to include them reflects the much more combat-orientated linear design of this title. You crunch through the game, chewing up and spitting away environments at dramatic speed, without needing to go back to previous areas outside of a few exceptions. You may remember in Resi 2, the final segment adopted a more linear structure with loads of enemies that started to tax the limited combat options of the title. Thankfully, Resi 3 realizes that to accommodate a more frantic point A to B structure, it was going to have to make gunplay a little more intuitive. You can now turn 180 degrees at the press of a button. You now have 2 aiming buttons, one that focuses solely on enemies and one that will also hone in on destructible objects in the environment. And a last second reaction evade has been included, so if an attack is coming up on you, you can quickly create some safe space between Jill and the enemy, triggering a dodge or push depending on the incoming foe. It's not the tightest implementation of such a mechanic. It doesn't have its own button, instead you get out of the way by hitting the aim command, or if you're already aiming, by hitting the shoot command. Since enemies don't really have attack windups as much as they just sort of move into you and start chomping, it can be a little hard to get down and time correctly. And yes, since it's tied to other moves, I ended up doing it by accident a lot of the time. But all of this is still an improvement if the game wants to be so action-packed. I mean, the title gives you an expanded inventory for all that ammo and goodies about an hour in, free of charge, so it's pretty much accepted at that point that that's the style we're going for.
Eat this!
Fast-paced boom-boom action. And you know, it fits the setup. We're not here tiptoeing through a mansion slowly investigating, we're on a desperate escape, go go go. So how does Resi 3, despite all this, remain a spooky experience? I think a lot of you probably already know the answer to that. Resident Evil 3 cranks things up to no shits given territory about 10 minutes into the game when it presents you with the titular Nemesis monster, essentially the final boss of the first game on steroids, and prompts you with a question. Hey, do you want to fight this guy? And this guy shows up quite a bit. Resident Evil 3's big gimmick is that while you're going around collecting items and doing the usual Resi shtick, occasionally you'll get blindsided by 7 feet of meat and leather. Sometimes he'll show up in obligatory set locations, sometimes he'll appear in places if you take a given route or pick up items in a certain order, and of course he'll appear as part of the story in tough as nails encounters where you have no choice but to fight. But the main idea is this: on your first time playing, you just have no idea when or where Bigfoot's gonna make his input. And that lingering thought in the back of your mind that perhaps while completing your next task he might pay you a visit is Resi 3's edge. The first moment where you realize that unlike monsters in previous games, Nemesis can open doors and follow you into the next room without a care in the world, doesn't even have to knock a wall down, is like one of the most nerve-wracking events in the series up to this point. His droning voice, only able to spout that single word, STARS, driving home his one-track mind and objective: to kill you.
Stars.
He's gonna get you! But what makes the Nemesis so cool is that he isn't some invincible, untouchable other that you have no choice but to run away from like in a lot of other horror games. You can take him on and down him for the time being to obtain extra elite items. He's tough as nails though, and you really have to weigh up whether or not it's worth the risk and resources to do. And of course, if you are in a tight spot and there's no chance of taking him on turning out too well, then yeah, he becomes that invincible boogeyman you have to evade. But there's no reason you can't mess with him the same way he messes with you. In that sense, he really is your nemesis in every sense of the word, rather than just a monster to run away from. If you've got what it takes, turn the tables on him. His presence also never gets into frustrating or annoying territory. Like, at no point did I ever feel like I had to tediously shake him off or run around in circles to make him disappear so I could move on to my next objective. Everything about him is handled just right. I can't think of many other enemies of this type executed quite as well. Resi 3 doesn't feature more than one main campaign, but to make up for that, it offers multiple choices throughout that can alter events, trigger different scenes, or have you tackle environments in slightly alternate orders. Quick forks in the road that might have you receiving different items as you play, etc. Resi 1 had a few moments like this, but here there's many more of them, and they usually affect the gameplay more significantly on a very immediate basis. Take the first choice, in which you're prompted with the option to fight Nemesis or flee into the police station. If you choose to stay outside, you can try to beat him to receive a special item, or you can even pick up your dead teammate's security card to get access to this key faster in the station, since you now won't have to go looking for Jill's card once you're in. Other choices don't affect things too much. Climb up here to avoid these boxes, jump down to avoid the boxes, and then climb up to the street again. But others can impact which characters appear in different locations or fights and dramatically affect how the final level plays out. For example, jump out the window before this tram crashes and Jill will receive some ice grenades from Carlos. But if you hit the brakes, you won't get the ice grenades, but Carlos will show up to fight Nemesis in an upcoming fight. One of the bigger choices in the game isn't signposted though, and is an interesting divergence for Resi gameplay structure. The first segment of the game is pretty standard. You get an item, you find another item that forces you into a story moment to get it, you combine them, you enter the next area. Hit up the police station, grab one of either key cards, get a code, get a key, get the lockpick. Bish bash boosh, another area. Nothing crazy so far. This is when the game mixes the Resi formula up though. There are two main locations to visit now, the cafe and the press building. Whichever location you go to first will be the one you meet Carlos in, and whichever one you go to second will be where you'll find an emerald, a key item to unlock another area. The emerald will always be at the second place you go to, and Carlos will always be at the first. Imagine that instead of meeting Carlos and an emerald, it was two emeralds at two locations you had to pick up. It would be the same principle really, it's just here you get a story moment to quote-unquote collect rather than an item. Wherever you decide to meet Carlos, Nemesis will attack and you have the option to knock him out or run away. Knocking him out is an easy way to get an item from him, but you won't at a glance know which option actually does that. Plus, whatever you pick will also have an effect on events in the future. Deciding to knock out Nemesis will result in Carlos being at a petrol station later on and a suspicious squad leader named Nikolai to be encountered at a sales office further in the game. But if you choose to escape from Nemesis, Nikolai will be at the gas station and Carlos will be at the sales building. Yeah, it's kind of dubious as to how these outcomes are a result of your decision making, but it's cool because it gives you something extra to find based on what order things are collected in. Sure, Resi 3 may only feature one campaign unlike previous titles, but these choices permeating almost every moment of the title still means there's reasons to go through again quite a few times. It's not far off from the amount of content you get in, say, Resi 1's double campaigns. And heck, Resi 3 also introduced Mercenaries Mode, but I don't have time to talk about that today. Like, I'm not sure just how many different scenes are actually hidden in here. For example, after the encounter with Carlos, you need to collect 3 items to power this escape tram in this corner of the map. But if you return to the tram early without collecting them all, you'll encounter a completely optional scene, where this soldier Mikhail kicks an explosive barrel down the road and kills a bunch of zombies. Doesn't happen if you go back only once you have everything. Easter eggs and secrets abound, and I think that works especially well in a horror game where you want to be surprised and run into the unexpected. This opening city segment is probably the most complex area of the title, having Jill run back and forth grabbing items to access other items to eventually get a bunch of key items that get you to the next chunk of the game. In other words, powering up that escape tram I mentioned. Oh wow, what a surprise, a PS1 Resi game where the title's first big chunk is the most complex and exploratory, wow. One of the big differences of course is that unlike 1 and 2, 3 doesn't arse itself with the west wing, east wing and main hall design of the Spencer Mansion and 2's police station. Instead, it's just a cluster of alleys and streets stitched together any which way. So unlike the mansion and police station where it was a lot easier to orientate yourself based on that even design, you generally knew if you were on the right side or left side of the building and could figure out where to turn next quickly based on your relation to the center area. In Resi 3, the haphazard street layout made me second guess now and again which path to take at a glance, even with my destination in mind. It can be kind of hard to immediately assess which turn you want to take when running down an alley with the camera all top down, switching viewpoints all the time. Resi 3 doesn't force you to become too acquainted with a given area though, since there's not too much backtracking. There's a small detour back into the early areas of the city to grab some oil-related item, but then you can dash back out pretty quick. Unless you want some nice optional grenade launcher ammo that can now be accessed, which okay, I guess why wouldn't you? You need that emerald and a sapphire to access the area with the tram, the sapphire being found in the police station. So I guess if you didn't get it on your first visit, you might have to return there, but come on, chances are slim that you didn't pick it up. Come on, just mash that inspect button on everything, that's how these games work. Overall, the quest for the tram is a cool, memorable sequence. You'll contend with the choice of which venue to meet Carlos in, deal with pre-scripted Nemesis appearances and some that trigger based on what order you go about collecting things. And you get to go to the police station before Leon and Claire arrived in Resident Evil 2. It kinda almost adds an extra chilling element to Resi 2 in retrospect. Damn, Nemesis was tearing through here before I even showed up as Leon. Spooky stuff. It's also worth noting that we've now ditched the key that opens multiple doors gimmick from Resi 1 and 2 completely. And yes, it's kind of still disappointing that optional rooms are once again, like in 2, in short supply compared to 1. I think the level design of the city, as mentioned before, isn't quite as tight and intuitive as the police station from 2. There's a lot of long, kinda tedious alleyways that stretch out a bit too much here maybe, and as you can see, the level itself is designed in a very linear way. I think the addition of a way to get from the tram back down to the lower areas and kind of make the level into a sort of circle would have improved it a bit, since as it stands you kind of just have to backtrack up and down the one route that there is. There's a lot of dead ends in this level, the strategic environmental traversal of old isn't really present. You don't have to think out what route to take to the objective you want to go towards because there's probably only about one way to get over there, and like with 2's color-coded lock indicators on the map, you won't really have to figure out where to go very much like in 1 because everywhere important is glowing at you. But despite the fact you aren't finding keys that unlock multiple rooms to go explore and the way you get from place to place is a bit railroaded, Resi 3's approach to choice and its item placement still allows it to compete with the big boys. Yeah, there are no keys, but when you get that lockpick, you gain access to a whole section of the city to look around in, right? Not too bad. When you get the wrench and the broken tram, the game really gets to breathe, as you're given 3 chunky objectives to go do in any order. Contrast this with, say, 2, where you get the club key at the end of the police station segment, but the other doors it unlocks are so conveniently placed together, it isn't exactly sending you on the adventure of a lifetime. Here you have loads of choices that mix up story events and offer quite a bit of freedom as far as where to go in the later area of the city. While in 2, there was really no big diversions on the critical path. You got a key and then you collected another doodad on the side or continued to the next key. That said, it's all swings and roundabouts though, because 2 has 4 campaigns where each time the story and the way you have to navigate the world changes significantly, so the question is, would you rather have 4 stories heavily set in stone for you to play through, or would you rather have one campaign that lets you mix and match events and diversions as you play? Both methods have an interesting impact on the way the story is presented, but I do think that when it comes to enticing me to replay, I feel a little bit more inclined to dip into 3 because of what I can decide to do on the fly here, and the liberty I get picking and choosing the order and outcome of a lot more things in the moment-to-moment gameplay. After getting the tram going, Resi 3 stops messing around and goes full action-packed, mostly linear Resi 2 final level design style for the rest of its duration. First you get the clock tower, which gives us a sort of mini taste of that mansion layout again, but now on speed. It's a pretty quick segment. But, you know, I enjoy it as a throwback to the old level layout of past games for a nice, succinct area and a location with some really cool environmental art. The choice before you go in will dictate what side of the clock tower you enter via, but the game just switches the location of these 2 keys around so you'll always get the one you need first near where you arrived. So the flowchart doesn't change, saves me some time there. You get a couple of old school Spencer Mansion style puzzles and then boom, a boss fight with Nemesis. The first encounter with him, by the way, in which you have no choice but to take him down. Keep in mind, these fights with Nemesis are way harder than any boss in Resi 1, including the final one. Damn, is he resilient. Resi 3 really ramps up the difficulty compared to past titles from my experience with it, and that may be because I'm playing on hard, but that's kind of a result of having no choice in the matter. This was when games didn't mince words. You're gonna play on hard, you're gonna play on baby easy weezy peasy mode. There's no middle ground here. In this battle, Jill gets infected with a virus and knocked out, so it's on our boy Carlos to go get her a vaccine. Which seems to be a bit of a theme in all these Resi games. This is our chance to play as another character in Resi 3 for a short segment, and it's the best support character level we've had in the series up till this point because you actually get to do something. Carlos is armed with a gnarly machine gun, so you head into the hospital, guns blazing. You need both an item in the basement and 4th floor to complete the vaccine, and depending on the one you go to collect first, you'll get a different scene of Nikolai disposing of this soldier. Again, a choice you wouldn't even know is there the first time through unless you died and decided to tackle the level in a different order or something. You know, this is what I'm saying about Resi 3, it's like a custom story you get to make every time you play. The next little area of the park is weak and feels like quick padding. Either go all the way down this long path first and get a key, or go all the way down this long path first and realize that you need that key and go all the way back. It's not very good, and I think a real waste for the first proper cemetery location so far in the series, The final segment is the one that plays out the most differently depending on whether you push Nemesis off this bridge or leap down yourself. The choice will alter what direction you enter this secret Umbrella factory from and whether or not Nikolai gets taken out by Nemesis or gets his hands on the facility's escape chopper. Nothing changes about the item placement this time, you just won't need this key to get downstairs if you know you already entered from downstairs. Either way, there's another obligatory confrontation with Nemesis in which this time you're under a time limit and there's like acid tanks around the room you can hit to do some extra damage. Yeah, mechanically it's not really getting that crazy with the lumbering giant tyrant style boss fight, but it's a little more than what was going on in the last 2 games, I guess. The acid around the room is a nice contingency for killing Nemesis if you really ballsed up your playthrough and are low on ammo for some reason. A nice thought, since as we know in Resi, once the items are used up, they're used up. If Nikolai didn't get killed, he'll taunt you from the chopper and you have the choice to try and negotiate, in which case he just leaves. Or the choice to shoot him down, which might just mark the first human player kill in the Resi series. Probably one of the few we ever get, to be honest. And of course, before escaping, we get one final ditch return from Nemesis, still doggedly pursuing its mission to kill all STARS members. He shows up one last time to grotesque shambles of flesh and tentacles. Luckily, there's a giant-ass rail cannon down here. The boss fight involves luring Nemesis in front of the cannon at the right time to obliterate him before a nuke hits the city, so pressure's on. Countdowns all around you. And my god, that final hit from the cannon is some satisfying stuff. Ooh, the PS1 can barely handle it. I think we've maxed out what we can do on this console now. Only one thing remains, the greatest choice moment in game's history. Do you want to leave now and let the pathetic remains of the creature that pursued you the whole game die on its own, or do you want to end this shit gangster style?
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
I'll be honest, Resi 3 is a great game, but this is the moment it becomes legend. Just look at this 50-kilo woman one-handing this magnum as she obliterates the villainous Umbrella's toughest creation. Resident Evil 3 gives you all these choices, some with quite a bit of consequence, and then subverts it all by making the last decision just be a question of how much satisfaction you want to end the game with. Nobody ever picks to just leave and escape quickly, come on. Wait, hold on a second. Where was the rocket launcher? Well, it is here, just that now it's kind of an optional secret. You have to take this facility key down to this special machine, which will give it the key powers it needs to unlock the door to an armory. It kind of serves as more of an Easter egg here, since you can't kill Nemesis's final form with it, and all there really is left to destroy is Nick's chopper anyway at this point. If that's even the choice path you're on. But you know, I'll accept the 10-ton rail cannon as an alternative. Resident Evil 3 was a good example of upping the action in a horror series while adding new elements to counterbalance against these changes and still keep the game tense and unnerving. You've got plenty of guns now, but you're still nowhere near the top of the food chain. When stacked up against Resident Evil 2, it includes far less content, but I think it handles certain elements a little better. I think the full hog action ending areas are more enjoyable than they were in Resi 2, and a lot of it is because of the improved movement controls. But also because of the latter half of the game, your inventory can look significantly different each time, not just because of the different decision points and what might have happened to you in each branch, but also thanks to another element of choice that beats throughout the entire title. This time there's the inclusion of different types of gunpowder which can be combined together to create various ammo of your choosing. The more powder you save, the more different powerful ammo types you can eventually create, which means you're not entirely subservient to what ready-made ammo the game just happens to place lying around, but you actually have a bit of say in what kind of bullets you want to have more of, without sacrificing the fun that comes with looking for and managing resources. I think the action-heavy segments earn their place thanks to much more thought being put into the player's armory. I didn't even mention that new cool-as-heck mine launcher. Outside of Nemesis, boss fights are a little sparse in 3. You get this worm guy who, to their credit, includes a little more strategy than just simply shooting like most Resi bosses up till now. You can take down these light posts over this puddle to fry it, but most of the time you'll just be dealing with the big lad. I think just another big beast to take on would have been cool. I also thought for a bit that Resi 3 might have some dynamic difficulty or something going on. Sometimes I'd die and enter a room again only to find more items there, or would reload to a difficult section to discover easier enemies like zombies in place of hunters. But then on subsequent playthroughs, those enemies and items sometimes were already there when I showed up the first time, indicating that this stuff is actually random chance. Sometimes you enter a room and the game just rolls the dice as to whether an optional pickup will be there or not. There's even a chance that the grenade launcher and revolver location can be switched. And while I assume this stuff must annoy the shit out of like speedrunners, I actually quite like this as another element of surprise and a curveball on repeated playthroughs. Survival is about working with what you have to get out alive, and while I think this would get annoying if like every item in the game had a random location, I can deal with a few choice moments like this. All this cheekiness, of course, strikes me as the moves of a game that is trying to mask the fact that it's actually pretty small in size. It doesn't quite have the same leap in production value that the first game had to the second, so I can see why at the time some people might have found it a bit underwhelming in that regard. To tell the truth, Resident Evil 3 feels like it's on the teetering edge of being underwhelming. Like if just one element of this concoction of choices, nemesis, and control enhancements wasn't present, it would cave in, and be that less a spin-off it could so easily have been released as. But instead it all comes together and the title hits home with great new ideas of its own, proving to be an excellent ending to the Raccoon City saga. That said, it's clear at this point the slow, ominous room-to-room exploration of the original game is well and truly behind us. Resident Evil wants to still shock and surprise, but it also wants to be exciting now. A thrill ride from start to finish, with less chances of the player getting lost or experiencing too much downtime. But for those of you who enjoy both frights and thrills alike, Resi 3 is a great middle ground that manages to pull off both just well enough to solidify itself as a genre classic. Next time, we're leaving Raccoon City as well as the PlayStation 1 behind us as Resi jumps a generation of systems with Resident Evil Code Veronica. See you there. Thanks for watching, everybody. Road to the Rocket Launcher is a show directly funded by my lovely patrons. If you'd like to support, please consider backing at patreon.com/TheGamingBritShow, or by clicking on that big P on the screen. Peace out.